So we are, I think, one of the first 10 churches in the Diocese of New Jersey that is opened up for in-person services. And we're actually one of the very few churches around, even not just Episcopal churches, that have opened up. And I gather on Zoom with our local ecumenical clergy. We used to do it once a week, now we're doing it twice a week, and so a lot of them haven't opened up yet. And so they were asking me, well, how are things going? And I said, the hardest thing is preaching before a congregation that is masked. Because there's no feedback whatsoever, right? Like, I say something I think is kind of witty, and like, it's just, I say something that, might like stoke the fires a little bit. So maybe if you could be like a little Pentecostal, like if you get excited, maybe do something like this, or if you don't like what I'm saying, give me like a tisk tisk or something like that so that I can actually, we can interact a little bit. Today's Old Testament lesson is one of the hardest lessons in the Bible, the near sacrifice of Isaac, known sometimes just simply as the Akedah, which is Hebrew for the binding of Isaac. It is, it sounds incredibly strange and foreign and primitive to our ears. In fact, Jim and I were having a conversation up here. He was talking about, the sections in the Bible where it says, like, go and take a goat and sacrifice it, and how, like, that's just, like, sounds really weird, right? It sounds weird. We have no, like, vector for understanding that. And this lesson isn't even that. It's God coming to Abraham and saying, take your son, your beloved son, who you waited for decades for, and I had promised you for decades. You finally got your son. Now you're going to take him, and you're going to sacrifice him and then burn him on an altar. Most of us, hopefully all of us, have our understanding of God, our experiences of God are very different than that. And because it is such a difficult passage that people have wrestled with, not just in the Christian era, but long before, there's a lot of writing on this passage. There are entire books on this passage. If you ever had to take a Philosophy 101 course, or you watched enough episodes of The Good Place, then you've heard, I can't see if you're smiling. I don't know if you actually watched The Good Place or not. I don't know. The name Soren Kierkegaard might ring a bell. Kierkegaard was a 19th century Danish philosopher who wrote a lot and did a lot, but he is known for, he made his name on his book, Fear and Trembling, which is entirely about the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. He actually goes through and interprets it 4 different ways. Other philosophers and theologians have done similar things, and you know that I tend to dig into the philosophical and theological soup of lessons. I don't want to do that today. I want to do something a little bit different. But it is hard. It does jar our ears. But one of the things about this passage that I think is most jarring to me as a person of faith, as a father, is that while we get jarred reading or hearing this lesson, Abraham doesn't seem to be jarred at all. I mean, there are a bunch of passages in the Bible where God tells someone to do something and they argue with him. And they're like, oh, I don't know about that. Abraham doesn't argue back at all when God says, go sacrifice and burn your son. He doesn't break down in tears. He goes and talks to his wife. He doesn't even tell her what's going on. He doesn't say, Sarah, I've heard a voice. I think it's God. It's asking me to do this. What should I do? There's no wrestling with it whatsoever. He takes it on absolute faith. Says to Isaac, get your stuff and let's go. And they travel up the mountain. While it's jarring to us, it was not jarring to Abraham. Abraham's living somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. And part of the reason why Abraham is not as jarred as we might think he was is because the sacrifice of living beings was a thing. The sacrifice of humans was a thing. The sacrifice of children was a thing. In the pagan world, if you wanted to please your pagan false god, what you did was you sacrificed to that god. You made an offering to that god. And, because you wanted to keep your god happy. And so you might start out with like a turtle dove or a pigeon or something like that, but then a drought comes, or, war starts coming onto the horizon, and you're like, well, my pigeons aren't doing it, so then you up it to like a chicken, or a goat, or a sheep, or a heifer, or a bull. And by the time you get to a bull, you've run out of large animals in Mesopotamia. So now what do? Well, if a sacrifice is offering to God that which is most valuable to you, that which is most important to you, then you start sacrificing people. And what's the most valuable thing to us as human beings? Our children. And so they did that to please the gods. And so when God comes to Abraham and says, go take your son up in the mountain and go and do this, he's like, all right. That's not out of his frame of reference. He's like, okay, that's a thing. Let's go. What jars us in this passage is that God would do that. What would jar people 4,000 to 5,000 years ago is that God stays the hand of Abraham. God does not let Abraham go through with this sacrifice. This, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, and here we are, we're not even halfway through the book of Genesis. And there is a shot across the bow of religion in those days. And what it said was, this God does not ask this of us. This God does not ask us to sacrifice people or children. This God actually enjoys life and created us in his image and does not want us destroyed. And so we are not, this God does not require that of us. It was a wholesale change of what religion in the world was and what religion in the world could be. And here we are, chapter 22 of Genesis, and already the whole landscape of what religion was thought of in those days was changing. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, eventually the God of Jacob, the God of Moses, the God of Jesus, does not call us to do this. In fact, the exact opposite. God says, don't do this. This scene then is a reset. It's like God hit a reset button on what life and religion and spirituality was all about. And we're creatures that need reset buttons, right? Every once in a while we need a reset button. Every once in a while you realize okay, I'm eating a little too much cake. Tomorrow it's a salad. I'm going to have a salad tomorrow. All right, I've been a little sedentary. I've sat at home. It's feel 3 months of quarantine. Now, tomorrow I'm going for a walk, right? We do that thing where we reset ourselves. We take a look at our lives and say, okay, I'm off track. I need to get back on track. We do this sort of culturally around New Year's, right? Around New Year's, we make New Year's resolutions. And we look at where our life has been in the previous year, and we say, okay, what do I want to be different next year? Now, it's totally gone in a week or two, but at least we had that. See, can't see if you're smiling or not. I can't. Can you give me a little, okay. There. Amen. Amen. As a church, we do this in Lent, right? Lent is a religious reset button for us. We look at where our lives are, we look at where our relationship with God is, and we say, what can we do in this 40-day period so that when Easter comes, I'm in a different place, and I'm in a different place with God. We need reset buttons. Because there are times we all fall off the track. And it doesn't take all that much to get us off track. If you've ever laid tile or hung wallpaper, you know that that first tile, that first seam is everything. You can't go, that looks kind of straight, right? Because 10 feet down the wall or down the floor, you're 6 inches off. It just takes the littlest bit to move you off course. And you can, in the story in Genesis, you can see how far off course people were. They were thinking that killing children was something that God would want, right? They were that off course. Who knows where it probably started with the pigeon, right? And then it went to little Timmy or little Jimmy or little Susie, and tragedy. It only takes a little bit, and we need that reset button for ourselves, for our health, and for our spiritual lives, for our lives with God. This time, this strange time where we're all in, where a few of us are in church, and I can't see your faces, right? This time where we figure out every surface that we've touched. When we go to the store, do I bring my mask with me? That this strange time is a time as a reset button. It can be a reset button. And I do not want to minimize the human tragedy, the human toll on people's lives. I've lost people that I know and love to this disease. I do not want to minimize it at all. But it can be a time for us to reevaluate what really matters in our lives, in our homes, in our relationships, in our church, in our community, in our nation. I mean, very early on, and I know I'm not the only one who's had this experience, but with a family at home, very early on, the first week or two, we were like, oh, we get to sit down and have dinner together. We're not, there's no late meetings, there's no coming home from work late, there's no running kids to this thing, into that thing, into this thing, and we get to have one meal a week. Now we get to actually enjoy each other. Oh, isn't this kind of nice? What did we really need all of that other stuff when what we have around the dining room table is enough? I know I'm not the only one that's sort of had that that insight. Morning prayer. We started this thing the first day of lockdown, praying every day at 10 o'clock. I had no idea if it was just going to be me talking into a camera just by myself for a while, but a lot of you joined me, and this has obviously become a time where people are praying, and you are praying, and I know I'm praying more than I was prior to Corona. And my guess is you are too. There will, the question that we asked very early on, right, was when are things going to go back to normal? And I think a lot of us have kind of realized that not everything is ever going to go back to normal. There are things that will just, there will be new things that will emerge. Maybe we'll keep doing the birthday parades around town 5 years from now. Who knows? Maybe there's some good things that will come out of it. But there are some things that should go back to normal and will. And will. Someday we'll be back in church without masks, and we'll be able to see each other and pass the peace and receive communion at the altar rail. There are some things that will go back to normal and should go back to normal. But there are some things that probably won't go back to normal, and there are some things that probably shouldn't. And it's those things that shouldn't, those are the things that we have control over. Those are those little reset buttons that we can push in our lives so that whatever comes out of this, we can be better people. We can be more faithful people. We can be people that have a totally different understanding of what it means to love God and love our neighbor, to have compassion, to have empathy, and to pray. My guess is when Abraham came down that mountain after nearly sacrificing his son, that was a life-changing moment for him. It was a life-changing moment for the world. We're still talking about it 5,000 years later, but it was a life-changing moment for him. It was a reset button for him. Where are our reset buttons? And let's push them. Amen.